This happened a few months back. I was home alone and just chilling in my room. My dogs often like to lay with me, and this particular day, they were doing just that. My parents were at work, dad in another city, and mum at the school she works at. And my siblings were at school, and I know for sure that no one was home. So I'm just doing my homework, and I hear a couple of knocks at my door. My dogs immediately look up and stare silently towards the door. Maybe my brother was just home. I call out his name and open the door when I don't hear anything. Well, you guessed it, there was no one there. Odd. The thing is, if it was a random person who just happened to break into my house, my dogs would have went berserk and are weirdly keen at only barking at strangers indoors. Besides, I never hear any footsteps. I double check the time and notice it's only 10 a.m. Unless my siblings or mom got sick, there was no way they were coming home at this time. I was later assured that no such thing happened. I've had a couple of odd occurrences, such as things going missing and being replaced in the same exact spot only hours later. I used to dabble in the occult as a middle schooler, so maybe that's why. Our house was brand new when we got it, and it was only built on empty farmland. Animals have souls, I have no doubt, and love us as much as we love them. My first experience with the spirits of a deceased pet was my Siamese cat, Brandy. In life, she loved to lie in wait in the bathroom, waiting for the moment I passed by the door, and then she would pounce on my feet as I walked by. As soon as I would let out a scream, she would be on her merry way, having achieved her mischievous goal. She used to sleep with my middle son in his crib from time after he was born, curled up by his tiny head, watching over him as he slept. As he grew and moved to the top bunk bed, so did she, still curled up next to him. Time went on, and one day she stopped using the litter box, so I shut her in the laundry room downstairs to avoid any accidents on the carpet until I could get her to the vet. A few days later, when I took her to the vet, he advised that she had a tumour, and most likely it was cancerous. He also said that the prognosis, even with treatments, wasn't good. So I made the heart-wrenching decision to put her to sleep. I don't know how long it was after she passed, but I would walk down the hall to the bedrooms during the day, and I would see her curled up in her spot on the top bunk. The first time I saw this, I stopped and did a double take. But of course, the second time I looked, I didn't see her. One day, I took a load of laundry downstairs, and when my bare foot hit the concrete floor, I recoiled, screamed, and dropped the basket full of dirty clothes. The floor was warm, not cold like the concrete should have been. It was early in the day, too early for the afternoon sun to shine through the small window. I collected myself and cautiously used my hands to feel the floor. She was a petite little thing, and sure enough, the warm spot I felt was in the size and shape of my little Brandy, curled up in front of the washer. Apparently she had used that spot to sleep when I had kept her there. We moved from that house long ago. I'd like to think that when my middle son is in his bed in his home, maybe, just maybe, there's a petite little spirit curled up next to his head, still watching over him as he sleeps. I grew up in the house my grandfather built in western Nebraska with my parents and two sisters. There were always odd noises. Footsteps, knocks, bangs and slamming doors. Everyone would be at the table eating dinner together, and we would all hear a door slamming upstairs. Dead of winter, no windows open, and the house had no central heating. We all would just look at each other. My dad would usually make a lame joke to ease the tension. Once, my sister and I were home alone and heard noises coming from the north bedroom upstairs. The room was used for storage, so no one slept there. The noises sounded like water running and a person moving around. It was unusually loud and continued on for quite some time, We were so scared by what we heard that we ran to our grandma's house to wait for Mum and Dad to get home. When they did, my sister asked if there had ever been a bathroom upstairs. Mom said yes, the north bedroom had been a bathroom years ago. My sister and I just looked at each other. I was around 8 or 9 at the time, and I was so freaked out, I decided to work up my courage and ask my mom if there were ghosts in the house. I really was expecting her to hug me and tell me it was just my imagination, but instead, she just looked at me and said, "They're just family, honey. They won't hurt you." I felt my heart hit the floor. Some of the activity may have been residual, but something used to walk the hallway upstairs where we were sleeping. We always slept with the hall light on. One sister saw it as a clown. I don't remember what the other sister saw, but me being a child of the 60s saw cousin It from the Addams Family. It looked like a grey mist, kinda in the shape of a person. I guess I rationalised it as being something I was familiar with. But it still scared the crap out of me, seeing it float down the hall. All I could do was face the wall and pray that it didn't come into my room. My daughter is 9 years old now. She's grown up way too fast. She's always been an old soul. She's always had a way with people and animals. When she was a baby, she used to enjoy sitting outside in the front yard on a blanket and playing. There was a little tree in our front yard with a robin's nest. When my daughter was outside, the robin would come down and hang out just a few feet from her and keep her company. For my daughter, it was a completely normal thing. She would talk to it and wave, and the robin would just stay for several minutes and then fly away. It was like they understood each other, and it was so amazing to watch. Her aunt lives several hours away on a ranch in the southeast corner of the state. My wife and kids went down there for a visit one weekend when my daughter was 3. The ranch has been in that family for over 100 years. They live in the same ranch house that was originally built back then, too. The matriarch of the family died several years earlier, long before my daughter was born. This woman's name was Elizabeth, which is my daughter's name too. I didn't know that when we named my daughter. It was just a happy coincidence. During the visit, my daughter was downstairs playing. Everyone was upstairs playing cribbage. My wife heard my daughter talking and laughing, so she went down to check on her. She asked who my daughter was talking to, and she said, "The other Elizabeth." My wife brought her back upstairs with her, and my daughter talked about this other Elizabeth to everyone else. She told everyone that this Elizabeth was an old woman wearing a dress. The aunt, my sister-in-law, retrieved a photo album and asked my daughter to just look through it. She didn't tell my daughter to look for anyone. She just said that she wanted to share some old pictures with her. My daughter, Elizabeth, took to looking at the photo album. When she came across the other Elizabeth's photo, my daughter pointed her out and said, "That's her. She lives here too." After that, my daughter never saw her again. At least she never said so, anyway. I would like to point out that this happened to my mum's friend, and it has always played on my mind, so I thought I'd share it. This happened a long time back, so forgive me, as I do not remember my mum's friend's husband's name or his illness. My mum had a dear and kind friend named Dawn. They used to go to bingo together and meet up for coffee. Dawn always confided in my mum, as she trusted her very much. Dawn's husband was a poorly man, always in and out of hospital, where he would get treated and then sent home. This went on for years. But on this occasion, he took a turn for the worst and was admitted into hospital and became gravely ill quite quickly. He was moved into a room of his own, which allowed Dawn to visit him as often as she liked. So she used to visit him early morning around lunch and then tea time, 4 or 5 p.m. One particular night, she had trouble sleeping and just napped there and woke quite early in the morning. So she got up and showered, got dressed, and made her way to the hospital. She didn't have a coffee or have breakfast, as she thought she would grab something at the hospital canteen. She got to the hospital around 7:15 am and thought she would pop in and have a quick visit with her husband and then go to the canteen. By this time, her husband was sleeping most of the time and would wake, see her there and smile, and go back to sleep, probably due to the drugs they were giving him. Dawn made her way to his room, went in and sat by his bed. She saw him asleep, sat for a few minutes longer, and decided to make her way to the canteen. As she got up, her husband woke up, lifted his head and said, "They are coming to get me at 8 am. Then he went back to sleep. She was a bit confused and wondered who they were, but she said she just put it down to the drugs. She then headed down to the canteen, but decided to grab a coffee and a snack and head back to his room. She got her coffee and snack and got back to his room, only to see nurses in there, and they told her he just died at 8 am. So, from our living room area, you can see down to the double entry front doors. From coming into the house by the front doors, on your left is the office, on your right is our main bedroom, opposite the office. Then walking down the hall is the theatre room on your left, opposite that is the kitchen, and then walking a bit further is the dining and living area. We have our sofas positioned in an L shape, so the two-seater sofa faced the TV on the wall, and the three-seater sofa faced off the back wall, looking down the hallway to the double door entry. Okay, can you picture it? This happened one evening. I was laying on the three-seater sofa looking at the TV. As if I sat up, I would have to crank my neck to watch TV, so it was much easier laying down. My hubby was on the two-seater sofa, watching TV too, looking straight ahead. Now, almost every night, our printer would go off into a cleaning mode. You know, that kind of sweeping noise, like little brushes sweeping inside the printer. We had no doors to the office. It's open plan, so the noise travelled a bit, and it was noisy. I was trying to watch a movie on the TV, and the noise was a bit of a distraction, so I looked down the hallway towards the office, as if to say, hurry up. As I looked down towards the office, I saw a pair of trouser legs. Yeah, just legs. Take two big strides from the office and disappear into our bedroom. I kind of stared for a bit, thinking, did I just see a pair of legs? Then I felt really panicky and really freaked out. I decided to just keep it to myself, as I came to the conclusion that maybe I imagined it. So skip forward a couple of months, but this time my hubby is laying on the three-seater and I on the two-seater. The printer goes off again. My hubby turns to talk to me, but as he does, his eyes look down the hallway, and I turn to look at him, thinking he's going to say something. And he says, "What the hell?" I say to him, "What?" And he starts to tell me he saw a pair of trousered legs just take two strides out of the office and disappear into our room. So I did see it. Whenever the printer went off again, I made a point to never look down towards the office. I had ordered 3 black and white prints of tree-lined streets in Paris to put into a triple all-in-one photo frame that I bought from IKEA. My daughter had just recently moved out of a share house closer to the university she was studying in. Her room became our spare room, and I decided to put a single bed in the room with a bedside table plus lamp, etc., and a craft desk there to do some scrapbooking in my spare time. As well as furniture, there was a long IKEA picture ledge on the wall with a couple of photo frames in it. Now let me describe this picture leg. It's a long shelf with a back plate that is screwed to the wall with a good inch ledge to the front of the shelf. So when you position a photo frame on the shelf, it's tilted with the top of the photo frame leaning on the wall, and the bottom of the photo frame up against the lip or edge, so it basically can't fall off. I received the prints from eBay and arranged them into the triple photo frame, and then added the photo frame to the long shelf sitting in the middle of the shelf, with frames sitting either side of it. I took a step back, had a look, and said out loud, "Looks nice," then closed the bedroom door. That evening after dinner, my hubby was in the office. My son went to his room playing his war games on his computer, and I was finishing the dishes in the kitchen. Hubby shouted from the office, "Can I have a cuppa, please?" I switched the kettle on, grabbed a cup from the cupboard, then heard this almighty crash, which sounded like a brick had come through one of our windows. My hubby came running down the hallway to the kitchen and asked, "What happened?" Then my son came out of his room and said, "What did you break?" I told them, "I haven't done anything." We all then decided to check around the house. My hubby checked the rooms and windows around the house. My son checked the garage to see if anything had fallen down, and I checked the garden. We were bewildered. The only room we didn't check was the spare bedroom. My son and hubby went into the bedroom to find the triple photo frame buckled and smashed, laying on the carpet. To this day, we cannot figure out how it could have possibly fallen from the shelf and end up buckled like that. I was always slightly attuned to picking up strange feelings in the air, or knowing when something was a bit off. My partner is the complete opposite. He's very skeptical and would always look for the logical option. We moved in together about a year after first meeting. Myself, Andy, my partner, our dog, a sloppy Labrador called Merlin, and 3 cats. The first house we lived in was fine, no activity at all. But then came the time that we needed to move to a rural part of our country, Gloucestershire, for anyone who's interested, for Andy's new job. I'd actually grown up in the small town that we would be moving to, so I knew it well. The house that we chose was a large cottage on the outskirts of the town. It was well over 600 years old and had been part of an old hot mill before being converted to a cottage in the early Victorian age. It was directly on the side of a busy main road, had no garden, but was opposite open fields. Great for the dog. We fell in love with it. It was quirky, big, and cheap for the size. A couple of things to note about the layout. The front door opened into a small hallway with a staircase on the right, a kitchen to the front, and the first living room on the right. Underneath the stairs was a basement door that led to a huge but damp and cold basement room that were used for utility stuff. Upstairs, there were 3 bedrooms and a bathroom. Right from the first day, I picked up a couple of weird vibes from the front room and upstairs landing. Couldn't put my finger on it. It just felt like we were being watched, and they were a bit colder than the rest of the house. We got the big stuff moved in, and were absolutely exhausted on the first night. We kind of flopped on the mattress upstairs and were just resting, looking at phones and talking sort of thing. Suddenly, I caught a flash out of the corner of my eye, going across the ceiling. I pointed this out to my partner, who just brushed it off as me seeing things. However, as a few minutes went by, we both began to see these tiny blue lights that left a sort of shimmering trail go across the ceiling. Andy actually filmed it, and I think we still have the footage somewhere, and you can see these lights going across the room. I'll try and find it. The lights stopped eventually, but we were both a little unnerved. We lived there for about 3 years, and I found the activity seemed to come in waves. It would get more frequent and dramatic, and then abate, before leaving a bit of time and then developing again. I never felt quite safe when alone in the house. Andy would generally work late, and then before we had a car, he would cycle home. About a 45-minute journey. I worked in a school, so generally got home before him at about 4 or 5ish. A few times, whilst home alone, I would hear footsteps on the stairs and doors opening by themselves. This scared me the first time, as I genuinely thought a person had gotten inside the house, and went around looking with a knife in one hand and the dog leashed in the other. She was growling, which also added to my concern, as she never usually growled. Of course, there was nothing there, and I frantically rang Andy and asked him to come home. The tiny door to the basement would open itself all the time. Sometimes I would find our ornaments just randomly placed in front of it or in the hallway. The dog always seemed a bit skittish in the hallway. A couple of times she would just stand and stare at the stairs and growl, which freaked me out. The living room also had a strange feel. It was wood panelled and faced the road outside, so unless it was nighttime and quiet, we would constantly hear cars and trucks going by. One particular corner by the window always seemed darker somehow, and I didn't like sitting near it. A few times, we both saw shadowy figures dart around the corner of our vision. Andy kept trying to brush it off, but it was genuinely strange and we couldn't explain it. I also saw a small photo that I had placed on a table rise up a few inches in the air and then set itself down again in that room. It just generally had an uneasy feeling. My dad picked up an elderly gentleman in that room apparently, a grumpy old bugger who didn't like us there. We also used to hear voices on the landing, usually male, unintelligible and kind of muttering, mumbling. This would be when one of us was in the bathroom and the voice would be heard just outside on the landing. A few times, Andy came downstairs and asked if I had been trying to call him or talk to him. I would usually be downstairs watching TV. The TV and electrical stuff would also turn itself off and on all over the house. A touch lamp in the bedroom with a brightness slider was particularly bad. It would always start off dim, and then I would wake up at 3 a.m. with it on full whack and stupidly bright. The slider was quite firm, so you had to give it some force to move it. The house had old windows with a kind of metal latch. I have no idea why, but I always felt uneasy around the bedroom window in our room. We first had our bed underneath it, and I felt like I would wake up in the night and feel someone stood over me. It would also open itself often. We would hear the catch being lifted, and the bloody thing would swing open so hard it would hit the side of the house in still, sunny weather. When we moved the bed to a different part of the room, I slept much better. Two of the strangest things that happened both included Andy. Andy was cycling home in the dark one evening, whilst I was in the kitchen making tea. As you cycled up our road, the side of the cottage would be visible, so Andy could see the kitchen lights and one of the windows to an upstairs bedroom, the one we didn't generally use as it was a bit creepy. As he came up to the house, he could see the kitchen light on and me inside it. He could also see that the bedroom light upstairs was on and that the curtains were drawn. As he came closer, he said that the curtains pulled back slightly and a figure looked around out of the window and waved at him before pulling the curtains back again. He asked me who I had over when I came in, which confused me as it was just me, and I hadn't been upstairs since coming home. Of course, when he looked, there was no one up there, and the light had been turned off again. Now Andy, who is logical and skeptical of all things paranormal, couldn't explain that. The other really standout thing was pretty scary. We were both chilling in bed one night, cats and dogs with us on the bed. On the back of our bedroom door was a hook, on which I hung a fairly large slate heart with a cute saying printed on it. For some reason, we both looked towards the door at the same time. The heart began to lift itself up slowly in the air, and then it absolutely slammed itself back down so hard that the whole door shook. We were spooked. The dog went bananas and the cat shot off on the bed to hide. We opened the door up to the dark landing, and I have to tell you, it felt really, really cold and really unfriendly, like someone was stood there glaring at us. We spent the night on the sofa downstairs. So many other little things happened. I can't remember them all, but it was a strange house. I looked into the history of it, but couldn't find anything that stood out. No deaths or anything like that. We were glad to move, as the cottage itself was in quite bad disrepair, had a damp problem and was isolated. On the very last day when we moved out, we were stood in the hallway with Andy's parents who were helping us out. Some kind of alteration had happened between Andy and his mum, and the atmosphere was tense. We were talking when suddenly there was a huge crash from the front room, like somebody had taken a metal pan and whacked it against the wall. We didn't stay long after that. When I was 18, 19, I worked nights at a beautiful old care home just outside of the town that I lived in. The home itself was situated high up on a hill and was very isolated. Nothing but fields and hills around. I think it was maybe a few hundred years old. Built on 3 levels with 2 specialised wards for residents with severe dementia. It was my first job, outside of a little Saturday stint working as a cashier. I was very sensitive and shy, and from the first moment I walked in there, I felt overwhelmed. There was a lot of sadness in that place, as well as this feeling of deep calm. I can't describe it well, but sometimes the atmosphere felt so thick and heavy, it was like walking through soup. I worked nights with a small team of people. It was our job to make sure that everyone got to bed and was safe and clean and comfy. We would also keep an ear out for anyone ringing bells or buzzers in the night. On the walk was an intercom system. The number on the room who had rung would flash up. Of course, during my time there, we did have a few people that passed away. One, as I was cleaning her room, which really shook me up. However, one of the strangest things that happened after a little old lady passed away in a downstairs room. On the night I worked, the room was empty, as it was being prepared for someone new to move in. We had finished our rounds and were all in a large common room when the intercom flashed up with the room number of the lady who had passed. We were a little confused, but wondered if there was another resident who had wandered in and pressed the button. Upon checking, the room was empty, and all of the residents on that ward were seemingly asleep in bed. The buzzer for that room rang maybe 4 times that night, and apparently the next night too. I wasn't on shift. One of the ladies I worked with had a real dislike of the downstairs area. You had to walk through this really cool glass atrium style passage to get to the lower level of the building, which was where all the residents with severe dementia lived. The doors to the atrium were locked, for safety, and there were usually 2 members of staff situated down there at all times. This particular lady hated being put on shift down there. She told me she would often hear doors opening and shutting when everyone was asleep, and once felt a hand on her shoulder when no one had been sat with her. The home cat, who was a lovely, gentle little thing, would hiss, spit, and claw if someone tried to take him near to that ward. Personally, I also hated being down there, as it was very dark and oppressive. Maybe just as it was a basement. The last thing is less paranormal, just a bit creepy. There was a lady in room 45. I remember, as I used to dread seeing that number flash up. She would always ask for me if I was on shift, unfortunately. She was a very large lady with limited mobility, so often needed help with moving to use the loo, which is when she would call for me. Her room was filled, and I mean filled, from wall to wall with dolls. They even covered her bed, so that when she slept, they were over her like a blanket. When I went up to help her, she would grip my arm, look me straight in the eye and tell me about her husband who was in the room and who was getting her pregnant and raping her. For a young, naive 18-year-old girl, this really used to scare me. I would help her into bed after, and she would often try and get me to stay to change the baby or talk about the people that lived in her room. It was all due to dementia. I knew that, but damn, I hated being in there at 3 a.m. We moved there when I was about 13, and my sister was 12. The house was huge, with a 20-foot living room, where the shop front would have been, and a converted annex on the side of the house. The annex was the reason we moved, as my dad's mum has had a stroke, and we needed to care for her. The annex, the kitchen, and the bedroom above were the recent extensions added to the house. The rest was early Victorian. My bedroom was part of the older house. It was fairly smallish and had Victorian features, like an old fireplace in the wall. It wouldn't have been my first choice, as it made me feel instantly uneasy, but my little sister was quite a diva and usually got first pick on the rooms. She took the nice modern room at the end of the hallway, and I was too easygoing to argue back. So I was stuck with a creepy old room, which was fine initially, as the more scary activity didn't start for about a year. However, the dog would refuse to come inside, and my cat would always rocket out of the window or bang on the window to go out at 3 a.m. every night without fail. The other strange parts of the house were the landing, the upstairs bathroom, and the huge front room downstairs. When using the bathroom, I would often hear footsteps running across the landing outside. I always blamed my sister, but she would usually be in a room or downstairs. Once, whilst having a bath in there, I distinctly heard the sound of children's laughter from right outside the door and small footsteps running away. My sister was too old to sound like a young child, and she wasn't the type to prank me, so I kind of dismissed it. The cats and dog would also often stare up at the stairs and follow something with their eyes. I would also catch shadows out of the corner of my eyes while sitting near the entrance to the stairway. The whole house just had a generally unfriendly feel. Anyway, fast forward to when I'm about 14 or 15. Our family situation with our nan was stressful at the time, as she had dementia. Won't go into it too much, but myself and my sister had to take on a lot of care for her whilst mum was working. We were also home educated by my dad, and had been since we were 7 or 8. This was his choice, and benefited me certainly academically. However, socially, I felt very lonely and isolated, and a bit of a freak. Local bullies didn't help either. These negative feelings led me to becoming very depressed. I would slope off up to my room, and the negative atmosphere would really increase. My room always felt heavy and oppressive. I also began self-harming at this time, after hiding a kitchen knife under my bed. My psychological state wasn't great anyway, and I don't know if the intensity of what I was doing affected the situation, but it almost felt like an out-of-body experience when I harmed. I would hold the knife, but it would be like I was stood behind myself watching. Can't explain it really, or pin it on something supernatural, but certainly surreal. Around this time, I also started noticing strange shadows and lights in my room, usually just before going to sleep. I put it down to stress and ignored it. I have mentioned before, in my last reports, that my dad was also a practicing spiritual medium. He had been out of work for a time doing this, but still occasionally did tarot for people and was certainly alert to anything spiritual or ghostly going on. One day, Dad kind of zoned out whilst I was reading a book. I noticed it but ignored him and carried on reading. When he came to, he looked at me very concernedly and began to describe to me everything that I had been doing up in my room. Of course, I was very upset, but I admitted to harming. He also said that one of my guardian spirit guides had told me this as they were worried, and also let him know that there was a negative presence in my room that was affecting me. After my parents gave me a talk about what had happened, and I solemnly promised not to do anything of the sort again, my dad went up to my room and attempted to cleanse it. I'm not sure if it ever worked, as it still felt very oppressive there and dark. I moved out into the converted summer house in the garden soon after, and it was so much happier and felt lifted. So say, neighbours told us that a girl who had lived in that house committed suicide at the city park in the 70s. I could never find any history of this, but it's certainly interesting if so. At one point in time, while brushing my teeth in the bathroom, I did look up and see the figure of a woman behind me in the mirror. She was around 20 or 30 years of age, blonde, and wearing a white dressing gown. Whether it was the woman who lived here before, I don't know. I certainly never looked up at that mirror again when I was in there. One other thing of note happened there to my sister. She was sitting alone in her room one night when all of a sudden, 2 sets of windows, her door, and all of the cupboards' doors violently flew open. As well as this, her stereo and TV turned themselves on at full max. My sister is petrified of paranormal things and would not likely make this up. She was terrified to go back inside for a while.